非常感谢张教授。大家好，我会说英语，因为我的中文不太好，但是你们可以用中文问如果有问题。So it's a great pleasure to be back here after having visited already, as we found out, 10 years ago and maybe 7 years ago for 2 intensive reading groups or courses in one case. So today I will be addressing the topic of technology and reification, and I will start with a brief video to show how technical transformation processes, now we all speak about artificial intelligence and the new spectre, but already at the beginning of modernity in the early 20th century, there was a huge discourse about modernization understood as a process of technological transformation of the human that comes with new kinds of challenges and problems. So in this talk I will draw on the discourse on reification in both the critical theory tradition as well as in Chinese Taoism. Last Friday I spoke a little bit about Confucianism. Today I'll at least mention Taoism, even though the orientation of the course is systematic, because I'm interested in looking for ways of thinking about technological transformation processes that are not technophobic, but also not simply naive in embracing technology. So let's start with a brief video clip from the 1927 famous movie Metropolis, where we see the transformation of one of the protagonists by the name of Maria into a robot and the role that the human heart plays in this process. So still quite captivating, even though it's almost 100 years old. This one of the central scenes from this classical movie Metropolis by Fritz Lang, and it shows quite well how this transformation of the human into a machine is a process that captivates the imagination with both fear and fascination. And I think we're still in a similar situation in our engagement with, for example, the recent developments in artificial intelligence and new forms of cyborgs or combinations, mixtures of humans and robots emerging. So interestingly, in this film, in the little clip, we have already seen the heart is pumping in the robot, and the film is one of the protagonists is the human heart. And here Maria, the real Maria, not the robot, says in a later scene, head and hands want to join together. Head is a symbol for politics or political leadership, while the hand stands for the proletariat or the working class. But they don't have the heart to do it, so it's the heart that is missing. Or mediator, show them the way to each other. So it's the mediator and the mediating role of the heart that takes on the challenge of bringing together political action and the working class or human labor. So I will return to this topic towards the end of the talk. Let me now focus on reification and the critique of technology. So reification, Verdinglichung in German, or thingification literally, the original meaning is a transformation of a no thing into a thing. So something that's not thing-like takes on thing-like qualities from the Latin res facere. In contrast to the more neutral concept of objectification or Objektifizierung in German, reification implies a structural shortcoming that calls for critique and emancipation. So some of the original takes on this concept. In Hegel, we already see it. Labor is this worldly making oneself into a thing. And then the most classical formulation in Marx's Capital, where reification is being interpreted as an epistemic mistake of attributing thing-like qualities like unchangeability, unresponsiveness, etc., to products or social relations, as well as, and the second dimension is often forgotten, a process of fetishization that transforms an object into a commodity, as Marx says, an enigma, ein Rätsel, a mysterious thing, a fantastic form of a relation between things. And then we have the classical discussion that introduced the concept into the modern Western Marxist tradition with Georg Lukács' History and Class Consciousness, where we find a systematic reconstruction of reification in terms of self, other, and world relationships. So in spite of pointing out the limitations of the concept of reification and grounding critique and emancipatory action, as we already see in Habermas' theory and praxis, the concept of reification continues to be relevant to reveal and critique pathologies that remain outside the radar screen of theories of justice. So it's a particularly useful concept if we're interested in identifying, explaining, and potentially improving certain problems that fall outside of the concern of theories of justice. And the concept is particularly relevant to diagnose and critically engage with pathologies of instrumental rationality, where humans and machines enter new relationships of dependency and domination. However, neither Marx nor Lukács have sufficiently applied the concept of reification to technology, so it only takes on a very small role in history and class consciousness, even though in a review that I will not engage with here because the talk is not primarily on Lukács. The concept of reification is being applied to technology more extensively. So the early Frankfurt-style critique of technology, quite well known in Adorno and Horkheimer, the dialectics of enlightenment. They identify a certain totalizing reduction of reason to instrumental rationality, for example, in remarks like the only progress that we have is from the slingshot to the megaton bomb, so that scientific progress is normative regression, and technology is the best example to show that. Then more extensively in Marcuse's gesture towards a changed relationship to new socialist technologies, but this discussion in one-dimensional man remains rather vague. And so the philosopher of technology, Andrew Feenberg, says, the critique of scientific abstraction and the dehumanizing effect of industrial technology seems anti-modern and technophobic. The vagueness of the Frankfurt School critique of science and technology leaves room for doubt. This, he says, especially about the first generation of the Frankfurt School. And for this reason that even though we find the critique of technology that it hasn't been developed further, it takes on relatively little room right now in the discussions of the philosophy of technology that usually draw on the classical model from Heidegger's The Question of Technology from 1954, where Heidegger criticizes technological enframing, or what he calls Gestell. And this critique of technological enframing that Heidegger identifies, for example, in cybernetics, is an estrangement from the world and has become a common trope in the critique of technology. And technological extractivism transforms nature into der Bestand, the stockpile. What is opaque and hidden in nature is made into a resource that is reduced to its use for specifically human ends. And Heidegger's alternative to technological enframing is what now we call cosmotechnics, especially in the art, also in craftsmanship, as that which resists computation, which cannot be computed. So now returning to the critical theory tradition, let's see how Habermas has tried to at least revive the critique of technology. To set free the technical forces of production, including the construction of cybernetic and learning machines, which can simulate the complete sphere of the functions of rational, goal-directed action far beyond the capacity of natural consciousness, and thus substitute for human effort, is not identical with the development of norms which could fulfill the dialectic of moral relationships in an interaction free of domination. So Habermas' critique of technology, in addition to this normative stage setting of differentiating technology from moral relationships in linguistic interaction, can be found in at least 3 or 4 different forms. First, we find the critique of technology in terms of its tendencies to colonize the life world in the theory of communicative action. Then we find the critique of genetic enhancement and the impact of subject formation, especially the difficulty of conceiving of oneself as a free subject if one knows that one is the product of certain engineering projections from parents, governments, or society. And the critique of technology-driven transformation of the public sphere into fragmented and unfiltered platforms, as we see in his most recent publication on the topic in 2022. Ein neuer Strukturwandel der Öffentlichkeit, or a new structural transformation of the public sphere and its consequences for deliberative politics. So the advantages and promises that Habermas' dialectical interpretation of the transformation of the new transformation of the public sphere first sets out to explain is that online platforms transform readers into authors. And so this is a good development, that we don't just have a reception of opinions, but we directly communicate among people who form and deliberate and defend their perspectives. Also, we have the, at least in principle, abolition of social and status divides if these platforms are truly open. Also, they allow for a reduction of complexity and a certain densification of opinion-making processes. However, the side effects of the digital revolution are well known. Here only two very representative publications of how digitalization has led to what Nicholas Carr calls a certain superficialization and has created shallows. And Susan Greenfield analyzes how digital technologies are leaving their mark on our brain, especially by undermining the capacity for creatively engaging with important topics and for building memory. So they are, for example, analyzing the Google effect. I guess here we should say the Baidu or Bing effect, the outsourcing of memory to the internet, and basically the decrease of the very possibility of attention span and memory that's essential for creativity and evaluation. So the pathological dimensions of platforms that Habermas also analyzes consists in basically algorithms taking over human decision-making processes. Trying to go to the secretary's office, I went up in the fall in the Falls Tower just now and ended up in the department for arithmetics on the 23rd floor in the other tower. So this was quite fitting, and maybe I should have given the talk there, where algorithms take over the role of human decision-making processes, where certain echo chambers and epistemic bubbles make it impossible that contemporary subjects engage with opinions that differ from their very own opinions, because the algorithms only feed them with opinions that they already share or have an interest in. And the epistemic bubbles directly create mechanisms of criticizing and dismissing anything that does not fit into one's particular world picture. Also, what belongs to the pathologies is an increasing global fragmentation by a decoupling of platforms, especially US and Chinese variations. Being a foreigner and returning after 4 years to mainland China, and not having WeChat Pay makes it very difficult for me to use a taxi. And so here we already see how this decoupling has effects in the life world, while digitalization may make it easier for some groups of the population to access these services. It makes it almost impossible for other groups. Also, asymmetrical relations between users and platforms, so there's almost no possibility of holding platforms accountable. Big data and surveillance as new kinds of pathologies that emerge with the digital revolution. Also, the reduction of attentive deliberation and the creation of new addictions, for example, through gamification, belong to some of the pathologies that we find in this new digital revolution. From a marketing economic perspective, the trends towards monopolization in the West, Google, Facebook, Amazon having the largest market share, and in China, Tencent and Alibaba and the respective platforms belonging to them. Also, what we witness is rising stress levels due to technological acceleration and constant availability that is being demanded by especially social media. So, and here we have one engagement, sociological engagement with Chinese case. Many similar impacts can be studied in the West, where the author, Yawen Lei, argues that many platform companies use algorithms not only to match consumers with service providers, but also to manage and control workers' behavior, converting workers' general capacity to work into a specific and quantified amount of labor, and engaging especially with the group of food delivery drivers. She has conducted many qualitative interviews of showing how people have moved out of manufacturing and the industry into this new sector and are increasingly struggling with the time demands of, for example, getting the food in time and not receiving negative reviews from their clients. Can we address all these pathologies within the reification-based paradigm when engaging in a critique? The reification paradigm is not capable of sufficiently distinguishing between pathological and non-pathological technologies and modes of employing them, which I think a critical theory of technology that's not technophobic but also not naively technophilic, if that's a word, would have to develop. Modern technologies often are not reifications, but they present themselves as software and so on, and as flexible rather than thing-like. So we have to find different vocabularies in order to explain what is happening there. To operate smoothly, they require users to surf along rather than to view themselves, others, and the world as static things. Platforms do not require human subjects to exert control or domination. This work is being performed by artificial intelligence and algorithms which undermine human accountability. However, in the classical reification framework, starting from Marx through Lukács to Adorno, Marcuse, and Habermas, usually social relationships are being interpreted as being objective, thing-like relationships, but this is difficult in this new system where it's algorithms that take on control. Critical theory has often also reified reification and is blind to important cultural differences when it comes to engaging with technology, coping with the new kinds of challenges that we have in this digital revolution. And I think it's quite important to have at least, maybe not a cultural relativistic, but at least a culturally sensitive theory of technology that philosophers like Yu Hui have emphasized, that we need to analyze the question of technology, for example, from a Chinese perspective. Also here, this, because the issue came up during our last discussion, what kind of Spanish philosophers have been guiding in the 20th century. So we have here Ortega y Gasset, the most famous Spanish philosopher, and arguably the person where Heidegger took his critique of technology from, because already 10 years before Heidegger, Ortega wrote a brilliant book, Meditations on Technology, where in contrast to Heidegger, he has a much more nuanced engagement with technology, but Heidegger only takes over the critical aspects. But the important thing is that in the middle of this paragraph, Ortega asks here, what role can Euro-America play in addressing how technology addresses and changes our soul? Has it not rather been East Asia that's much more profound in thinking on and engaging with technology? I always had the dream of teaching a course in which I would compare Occidental, Western, and Oriental, Eastern ways of engaging with technologies and the technologies that have emerged there. So let's just look at one tradition, Taoism in particular, where interestingly, at least in the contemporary secondary literature, the term reification is often being used in relationship to technology if we look at Taoist scholarship. And so let me try to hopefully give a new interpretation of the story of the gardener from the TND chapter of the Zhuangzi. Daoist philosophy of technology. Daoism presents a means to think through strategies of de-reification that incorporates both praxis and poiesis in an ecologically sensitive aesthetic holism, leading to a decentered and liberated experiences of self and world, as one of the interpreters, Joseph Haroff, argues, while also offering a normative framework from which to critique reification. Instead of rejecting or devaluing technology, as it's often assumed in popular narratives about Daoism, if we look at the Daoist sources in some more detail, Daoists caution against naively adopting certain forms of instrumental thinking and action. However, in many of the stories of the Zhuangzi, for example, we do find people engaging with technology in skillful ways, as you know much better than I do. What is the critique of reification or thinking about de-reification from a Daoist perspective like? So Daoism criticizes the fixed mind or fixed heart and insists on fixating rigid oppositions into things either being a certain way or not being a certain way, either being good or being bad. There's an engagement with de-reifying practices such as the Wu forms, only 3 of them here with Wu Wei, Wu Zhi, and Wu Yu. According to Roger Ames and David Hall, de-reification consists in, quote, non-coercive actions in accordance with the de of things, a sort of knowing without resort to rules or principles, and desiring which does not seek to possess or control its object. I will try to develop a slightly different interpretation. To understand a thing as a thing requires understanding its inherent life processes and relationships to the myriad things in the world. So the classical story from the Zhuangzi that you may all be familiar with is that of the gardener. The gardener, when being asked, when confronting Zigong, raised his head and looked at Zigong. Zigong is saying, well, don't you want to accept this most recent technology by which you can water your plants much more efficiently, namely the well sweep, instead of continuing with your simple bucket? And the gardener raised his hand and answers, how does this new technology work? It's a contraception made by shaping a piece of wood. The back end is heavy and the front end light, and it raises the water as though it were pouring it out so fast that it seems to boil right over. It's called a well sweep. The gardener flushed with anger and then said with a laugh, I've heard my teacher say, Zhuangzi, where there are machines, there are bound to be machine worries. Where there are machine worries, there are bound to be machine hearts. With a machine heart in your breast, you spoiled what was pure and simple. And without the pure and simple, the life of the spirit knows no rest. Where the life of the spirit knows no rest, the way will cease to buoy or float you up. It's not that I don't know about your machine, I would be ashamed to use it. So there are lots of translations, and since you are native speakers, I will not try to engage and offer only the translations of the Jixin that we find here: machine heart like a machine, ingenious contraptions, contrivancy with tricks, cunning devices that some of the translators have been using. So what is the story about? Zigong presents a naive technological optimism joined with a certain missionary spirit, a kind of zealousness. He thinks and suggests that the most advanced technology, the well sweep, needs to be adopted by everybody, including this seemingly old-fashioned gardener, to reduce effort and advance efficiency. However, the gardener's response is initially anger, then humor, maybe even sarcasm, and then rejection of the proposal out of the fear to engage in a shameless action. So common interpretations of this story say that, well, it could be an ignorant peasant who embraces primitivism, the typical vision of Taoism. Yet the gardener wants to know and knows about the new technology, so this doesn't quite fit the standard interpretation. One could also say that the gardener is a kind of idealist who fancies himself to be more authentic and in unity with nature, so a kind of hippie. Yet he does not defend his preferred tool to be followed by others, so he's not trying to develop a teaching based on his rejection of adopting the new tool. One could also say that it's a kind of subversive dropout, an anarchist who challenges established conventions, that one has to go with the flow and develop the new technology. Yet he refuses to serve as a model or teacher. It is important perhaps to put the story into a larger context. During later periods of Chinese history, even though the first well sweeps were archaeologically discovered 200 years after Zhuangzi, the administration of and the dependency on water was the essential element or medium of political integration. So, for example, the critical theory sinologist Wittfogel uses the term of the hydraulic civilization to analyze China's economy and certain political developments coming out of this. So this could at least be an important information in understanding the rejection of the gardener. Both interlocutors engage in a dialogue where they present the advantages and inherent problems of specific technologies. This is also quite important. It's not a rejection of all technologies. What could be the reasons for rejecting the well sweep then? Well, adopting the well sweep would imply a transition from a tool, namely the bucket with the vacuum, to a machine. The gardener, so it could be about the very nature of the technology. That is one response, say that there is an important essential difference between them. The one is a tool that we can easily understand and fix if it breaks down. The other is a machine that's too complex to understand and fix in its operation, even though it's highly efficient. However, we may also look at the mode in which the gardener has been employing his old technology. He has invested much effort into learning to use and value the previous tool, the bucket. His rejection of having to learn to operate a new machine prevents him from suffering what at least older people like me often suffer from, namely innovation fatigue. That every year we have a new software that we are supposed to learn, and says, well, I don't want to suffer from innovation fatigue, and so let me just continue using my old Word and PPT and not use whatever they are using now, which is, at least in Spain, it's not PPT anymore. And so he fears a certain sense of a loss all these years, maybe also a form of valuing this particular object, this particular bucket that he has grown familiar with, that's part of his identity, that he has been living with for many years. While the tool can be understood and placed aside, the machine would require continuous dedication and observation, which would, even though it might be less effort intensive, it would require a lot of observation and would result in a perpetually worried and occupied heart, so that the machine heart is not only copying machine structure, but the need to constantly be aware that something may go wrong and thus observe what the machine is doing. The transition from tool to machine coincides with a transition from an enchanted to one of a disenchanted nature. While the former is a locus of meaning and the use of the imagination, the latter is reduced to standing reserved for human manipulation and domination. However, in contrast to the prevailing image of the genuine person or the virtuoso the skillful artisan. In Taoism, we may think of Butcher Ding or other craftsmen. The gardener is not flexible and not portrayed as being calm in this story. He refuses to adapt. He is angry. He is concerned. He is sarcastic or humorous and stubborn. He has a certain sense of both humor as well as shame. So I think this is quite interesting that it doesn't quite fit the model of some of the other Zhuangzi stories of highly skilled kinds of craftsmen and butchers and fishermen and so on. So what could be the implication of this story for coping with new technologies from a critical Taoist perspective? Well, first we may want to say, well, it's not necessary that we become primitive and leave the world of technologies. So in modern liberal societies, complex societies, the use of new technologies should be neither demanded nor should it be prohibited. Instead, one needs to increase awareness of where a technology comes from and what impacts it may have on the life world of its users. Also, there's a need to cultivate tool-based virtuosity as well as the freedom to not be required to use machine-like technologies or not use technologies in a machine-like manner. So protecting certain low-tech domains, for example, even as the Chinese government has been doing in the area of childhood education by limiting the number of the number of hours being exposed to video games or perhaps even the internet, are required to allow for spaces of human flourishing. Resisting the tendency of being reified by technologies in a technology-driven society, however, will continue to require responses ranging from anger and stubbornness to sarcasm and shame. I think here I stop my presentation, so thank you very much. And here we have Maria again.